let's start this whole book reading extravaganza. It's like a little, how should I call it? Um, Book club. Yeah, sure. Book club works for this. I'm not sure if the music is gonna be too loud or too little, but we'll see in time. We'll be starting our book club today by reading an excerpt from one of my favorite books, and it's one that I've really enjoyed reading, and I have a lot of history with. If you've been on this channel for a while, well, which, you know, it's a no-brainer at this point. It's gonna be Warcraft related. That's been my whole MO for a while. But this is from Rise of the Lich King. Yes, the amazing book that told the story of Arthas that was already told in Warcraft 3, but they've done it again, changing a little bits here and there. Let's begin our journey. The wind shrieked like a child in pain. The herd of shovel tusks huddled together for warmth, their thick, shaggy coats protecting them from the worst of the storm. They formed a circle with the calves, shivering and bleating in the center. Their heads, crowned with massive antlers, dropped towards the snow-covered earth, eyes shut against the whirling snow. Their own breath frosted their muzzles as they planted themselves and endured. In the various dens, the wolves and bears waited out the storm, one with the comfort of their pack, the other solitary and resigned. Whatever their hunger, nothing would drive them forth until after the kneeing wind had ceased its weeping, and the blinding snow had worn itself out. The wind, roaring in from the ocean, beat at the village of Kamagua, tore at the tore at the hides that stretched over frames made of the bones of great sea creatures. When the storm passed, the Tuskars, whose home this had been for years uncounted, knew they would need to repair or replace nets and traps. Their dwellings, sturdy though they were always harmed when this storm descended. They had all gathered inside the large group dwelling that had been dug deep into the earth, lacing the flaps tight against the storm and lighting smoky oil lamps. Elder Atwick waited in stoic silence. He had seen many of these storms over the last 7 years. Long had he lived, the length and yellowness of his tusks and the wrinkles on his brown skin testament to the fact. But these storms were more than storms, were more than natural. He glanced at the young ones, shivering not with cold, not the Tuskar, but with fear. He dreams, one of them murmured, eyes bright, whiskers brittling. Silence, snapped Atwick, more gruffy than he had intended. The child, startled, fell silent, and once again the only sound was the aching sob of the snow and wind. It rose like the smoke, the deep bellowing noise, wordless but full of meaning, a chant carried by a dozen voices, sounds of drums and rattles and bone striking bone, from the fierce undercurrent the wordless call. The worst of the wind's anger was deflected from the Tanuka village by the circle of posts and hides in the lodges, their curving roof arching over a large interior space in defiance of the hardships of this land were strong. Over the sound of deep and ancient ritual, the wind's cry could still be heard. Yes, it's gonna be a hard one. The dancer, a shaman by the name of Kamiku, missed a step and his hoof struck awkwardly. He recovered and continued. Focus. It was all about focus. It was how one harnessed the elements and rang from them obedient. It was how his people survived in a land that was harsh and unforgiving. Sweat dampened and darkened his fur as he danced. His large brown eyes were closed in concentration, his hooves again finding their powerful rhythm. He tossed his head, short horns stabbing the air, tail twitching. Others danced beside him, their body heat and that of the fire that burned, despite the flakes and wind that drifted down from the smoke hole and the roof, keeping the lodge warm and comfortable. They all knew what was transpiring outside. They could not control these winds and snow, as they could ordinary such things. No, this was his doing. But he could dance and feast and laugh in defiance of the onslaught. They were Tanuka. They would endure. The world was blue and white, and raging outside, but inside the great hall, the air was warm and still. A fireplace, tall enough for a man to stand in, was filled with thick logs, the crackling of the burning the only noise. Over the unearthly decored mantle, carved with images of fantastical creatures, the giant antlers of a shovel tusk were mounted. Heavy beams supported the feast hall that could have housed dozens. The warm orange hue of the fire chasing away the shadows to hide on the corners. Carved dragon heads served as sconces, whatever those are, holding torches whose flames burned brightly. The cold stone of the floor was softened and worn by thick pellets of polar bear, shovel tusks, and other creatures. A table, long and heavy and carved, occupied most of the space in the room. It could have hosted 3 dozen easily. Only 3 figures sat at the table now. A man, an orc, and a boy. None of it was real, of course. The man who sat at the place of honor at the table, slightly elevated before the other 2 in a mammoth carved chair that was not quite a throne, understood this. He was dreaming. He had been dreaming for a long, long time. The hall, the shovel tusk trophy, the fire, the table, the orc, and the boy, all were simply part of his dreaming. The orc on his left was elderly, but still powerful. The orange fire and torchlight flickered off the ghastly image he bore on his heavy-jawed face, that of a skull painted on. He had been a shaman, able to direct and wield vast powers, and even now, even just as a figment of a man's imagination, he was intimidating. The boy was not. Once he might have been a handsome child with wide sea-green eyes, fair features, and golden hair. But once was not now. The boy was sick. He was thin, so emancipated that his bones seemed to threaten to slice through the skin. The once bright eyes were dimmed and sunken, a thin film covering them. Pustules marked his skin, bursting and oozing forth a green fluid. Breathing seemed difficult, and the child's chest hitched in little panting gaps. The man thought he could almost see the labored thumping of a heart that should have faltered long ago, but persisted in continuing to beat. "He is still here," the orc said, stabbing a finger in the boy's direction. "He will not last," the man said. As if to confirm the words, the boy began to cough. Blood and mucus splattered the table in front of him, and he whipped a thin arm clad in rotting finery across his pale mouth. He drew breath to speak in a halting voice, the effort obviously taxing him. "You have not yet won him, and I will prove it to you." "You as foolish as you are stubborn," the orc growled. "The battle was won long ago." The man's hand tightened on the arms of his chair as he listened to the both of them. This had been a recurring dream. Over the last few years, he found it now more tiresome than entertaining. I grow weary of this struggle. Let's end this once and for all. The orc leered at the boy, his skull face grinning hideously. The boy coughed again, but did not quail from the orc's regard. Slowly, with dignity, he straightened his milky eyes, darting from the orc to the man. Yes, the orc said. This serves nothing. Soon will be time to awaken. Awaken and move forward in this world once more. He turned to the man, his eyes gleaming. Walk again the path you have taken. The skull seemed to detach itself from his face, hovering above it like another entity, and the room changed with its movement. The carved sconces that a moment before were simply wood undulated and rippled, coming to life. The torches in their mouths flaring and casting grotesque dancing shadows as they shook their heads. The wind screamed outside, and the door to the hall slammed open. No whirled the three figures. The man spread his arms and let the freezing wind wrap about him like a cloak. The orc laughed, the skull floating over his face, issuing its own manic peals of mirth. Let me show you that your destiny lies with me, and you can only know true power through eliminating him. The boy, fragile and slight, had been knocked out of his chair by the violent gusts of frigid air. Now he propped himself up with an effort, shaking his length gusts of frigid air, or whatever. Now he propped himself up with an effort, taking his breath, coming in small puffs as he struggled to climb back into the chair. He threw the man a look of hope, fear, and odd determination. All is not lost, he whispered. And somehow, despite the orc and the skull's laughter, despite the shrieking of the wind, the man heard him. It warms my heart to know, to be able to talk about this story. It is a beautiful one, in my opinion, and it's a very good book. I think this one is the best Warcraft book you will ever get, though there are good contenders for it when it comes to the Warcraft catalog, especially with Day of the Dragon, with the Illidan book, Stormrage, for example, as well. It's really well written, and I really like it. Also, it's about one of my favorite characters, so of course I'm gonna be more biased towards it.